And so if you're watching pornography of any kind, just understand you are contributing to child sexual abuse material and child sex trafficking. 100%, it's been proven. I can show you the research.
Yeah. Take control of your life. Break the chains and rise. No more feeling powerless. No more shame. Take your power. Break out of the pain. Because it's more than fornication. More than procreation. It's not just self-stimulation. Sex energy is for creation and transformation and to a new destination.
This is Porn Talk.
Porn Talk.
This is Porn Talk.
Get empowered right now. We have an incredible guest with us today. Her name is Sabrina Stratford, and for 25 years, she's forged powerful partnerships as a global business manager in the world of IT. But then she made a courageous decision to leave it all behind and take a stand against the harrowing reality of sex trafficking, right at the heart of it in Alaska. Today, Sabrina is not just an abolitionist, but a beacon of hope, a TEDx speaker, and an unwavering advocate for the human trafficking hotline. Her boots on the ground experiences fuels her mission to inform and shape corporate responsibility plans, creating a ripple effect of change that resonates worldwide. Welcome, Sabrina Stratford. Welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. So what's your story? How do you go from being in the corporate world to boots on the ground fighting human trafficking?
Yeah, career changes. It happened, I think, because of COVID. I mean, certainly there's a lot of history behind why it happened, but when it happened, it was, we went into 2020 sitting in our living rooms, and I was no longer able to travel the globe to do my job. And so I was just talking to people all day. And I had lots of time with myself, I'm sure, like most of us did, saying, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? Am I making the biggest impact that I can? And I started asking myself these questions. And just at that time, I met a woman who was working for an NGO called Love Justice International, and they fight human trafficking with a protocol called transit monitoring.
What's an NGO?
A non-government organization.
Okay.
So they raise their own funding to make an impact, and they do transit monitoring. But they have been doing it internationally. So just think of people getting off of a train or a bus in India or in the Philippines. Those people become big targets of traffickers. And so they've made a worldwide impact in those areas. And they had this idea that they wanted to bring that project and that protocol to the United States. And so that's when I learned of this organization. And as they were talking through what they wanted to do, I just got struck with the invitation. And like within 2 weeks of talking to them, I had quit my career, put my home up for lease, loaded up my car. And I thought I was going to be going to like New York or California or something. And sadly, the problem is so big in Alaska. I ended up in Anchorage, Alaska, fighting human trafficking.
Wow. Well, that's certainly a bold, courageous move. But let's take it back a little. What resonate with you, like closer to home? Like what experiences did you have? I know you had some things happen when you were very young in regard to porn and
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah. I was thinking about the first time that I'd actually heard the term human trafficking, and I believe it was in about 2016. I went to a fundraiser, and I know we all have ideas about what human trafficking is, whether it comes from a movie like Sound of Freedom, which is definitely accurate, but not what's happening in the United States, or whether it comes from a movie like Taken, and you think of Liam Neeson going after somebody or a van pulling up and taking somebody. And while that does happen, that's not what's really happening in the United States. But this person on the stage in 2016 talked about being trafficked by a family member and how many times a day she got raped. And of
Mm.
course, that stuck with me. That really stuck with me. And I was just constantly thinking about human trafficking and doing research, but obviously didn't take any action to 2020. It wasn't, Eric, until I got into Alaska and hearing the stories from the women, and then actually going to work with the Alaska Department of Safety in the sex offender registry. When I was reading over their case files, that was my job every day, to read over these case files and make determinations of what people were going to do to register to come in the state of Alaska. So I'm reading over these files, and I don't know all of the psychological terms, but being triggered or repressed stories, are stories in my own life that I had framed differently. It all bubbled up, and I figured out that, the first time this really hit me, I mean, I was probably in like third grade, and I had a girlfriend who was a few years older than me, and she was mentally challenged. We lived out in the country in the panhandle of Texas, and we got to go everywhere and do everything, and it was wonderful. But we made a decision to go in a boarded up house and play tea party. And a bad man saw us go in there. Well, I say man, he was, I think he was probably a senior in high school. I know he had been held back a couple of times. And Terry broke into the house, behind us. And I didn't understand at the time what actually happened, but obviously later I figured out that Terry brutally raped my girlfriend, in front of me. And as a child, not being able to do anything, I think, is what really put that I need to go fix injustice, and make things right, especially when it comes to sexual injustice. So that was the first thing. A few years later, I figured out what he did to her, because my next door neighbor locked me in his bedroom and showed me a magazine that was now what I understand to be very hardcore pornography. And it was through those images that I went, oh, that's what happened to my girlfriend that day. And I put it all together, and, you just lock that all down, or you try to forget about it, but it never goes away. Something's going to happen with that kind of thing. And that's what happened to me.
Wow. How old were you at the time about?
When he locked me in his bedroom, I was probably seventh grade. Whenever that rape happened, I was in about third grade.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
So, in your TED talk, you talk about porn not being a victimless crime. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that statement, I get a lot of pushback on it, because people will say, well, porn isn't a crime. And what I mean by that is it is a crime against humanity. It is proven, and all I do all day is research this kind of information, Eric, but it is proven that pornography isn't built around empowered women. It's built around victims. And whether they're smiling,
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's just when you put it that way, it's like, yeah, it's not empowering them. That's for sure.
no. I mean, haven't you heard that before? Haven't you heard people say, oh, women are making a choice to take their sexuality back and make money from it? Wrong. There is no little girl on this planet that grew up saying, I want to be in pornography when I grow up. I mean, so it comes from being in a victimized place, like maybe they made that decision on their own because they're addicted to drugs or because they feel like they have no way out. I mean, that's best case scenario. But worst case scenario is that they are victims of sex trafficking. The vast majority of people online are victims of sex trafficking. And I know you've heard the term CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material. We used to call it child pornography, and that just really wasn't accurate enough. So there's been a lot of work to get it changed to child sexual abuse material, because no child is agreeing to be in pornography. And so 100% of children in pornography are victims of sexual abuse. And it starts with free porn. I think of this in like an endless cycle. There's free pornography that everybody has access to on their phones. And so you get on there, and then pretty soon the algorithm knows what you're liking, and it starts pushing you something more abusive, something more aggressive, and typically with somebody more younger and younger, so that you'll click more. And that's what the algorithm feeds on. And so if you're watching pornography of any kind, just understand you are contributing to child sexual abuse material and child sex trafficking. 100%, it's been proven. I can show you the research.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
And I wholeheartedly agree. However, there is an effort being made to separate trafficking from porn. And this is what I mean. On Netflix right now, there's a quote unquote documentary, which I believe that is funded by one of the big porn tube sites.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch that documentary, you'll come away thinking, oh, sex trafficking is over there and porn is over here. These have nothing to do with each other. And so there's an effort being put out to convince the public that sex trafficking has nothing to do with pornography, that, oh, the actors in pornography, these are all willing participants. They're just in the they're sex workers. They're all just sex workers that all want to be there. And that's what this documentary shows on Netflix.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're messing with their money, right? Just having this conversation, we're messing with their money. So, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And I think I know what organization you're talking about.
So, what is some of the, like, you're really like on the front lines there, like when you go to Alaska, what is some of the things that you experience, or what are some of the things that you do, or some of the tragic things maybe that you've heard?
Yeah, I can go on and on. So feel free to interrupt me, Eric, if I just start carrying on too much. But when I got up to Anchorage, it was for this protocol called transit monitoring. And so we worked with state officials, with TSA, with the chief of security at the Anchorage International Airport. And the idea was to execute this protocol at the airport. One of the main problems that Alaska has is that Indigenous women are being trafficked at an alarming rate. Because whenever you think of all of the things that go into victims of trafficking, it's vulnerabilities. Well, you don't get much more vulnerable than a woman in a remote village surrounded by men with money. So they are trafficked at a very, very high rate. And so we had this wonderful plan to execute at the airport. 16 volunteers we had trained up and ready to go. And as soon as I got out there and just had a couple of shifts to even observe the airport, I soon got a letter from the Alaska Attorney General to cease and desist and get out of the airport.
What?
I have lots of opinions on why. They were afraid, that since we were associated with TSA, that, well, they have their reasons. But my thought is that I read a lot of articles that whenever somebody from an airport, or from an airline rather, questions somebody about human trafficking, there's always backlash. They'll say, how dare you? How dare you hold up my day to ask me questions about this kid I'm traveling with? Of course, it's my step kid. And, most of the time it does turn out to be that, but the question has to be asked because so many times it's not, right? But there is so much backlash from the general public about how dare you, that airlines or airports don't want to take on the responsibility of, I could potentially be sued if I asked the wrong questions. And that's my biggest insight as to the problems that we have. We have to get over ourselves, that if somebody in security or a police officer or from the airport wants to hold us up in our travels a little bit to ask us some questions, let them do that. Get over yourself, because you might be saving a child from being trafficked and being raped several times a day. So what is the big deal about being held up? Okay, so that's the first thing. Got kicked out of the airport. Now, as you can imagine, I had quit my job, put my home up for lease, and I'm in Alaska with no program. I'm like, what is going on?
Oh my God.
I am a big woman of faith, just prayed through it. And thankfully, I was introduced to a woman at the Downtown Hope Center, which is the Anchorage Emergency Women's Shelter. And the executive director, this powerhouse woman named Sherry Laurie, I just introduced myself to her because my goal was to understand what she was doing with the women, but also to let her know that I needed housing, and that, she has a very philanthropic community around her. And I said, I'm up here self-supported, and now I don't have a program and I need a place to live. And she was like, oh, come with me. They had just purchased the apartment complex across the street from the emergency shelter to make it kind of like interim housing for women coming out of the shelter and getting jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And they, kind of had this idea of what they wanted to do. And God stepped me right into that. So that's what happened next. Is I got to spend every day with the 70 women coming through that emergency shelter, and then working at Sweet Hope, which was their transitional housing, as property manager. And that was the job that put me on a daily basis, toe to toe with sex traffickers every day.
Wow. So what are some of the stories you got with talking to sex traffickers?
Yeah, just thinking of one. So the emergency shelter, they serve soup and sandwich 365 days a year out of their big kitchen. That's part of the services that they have to the community. And because of that, that's where the homeless community comes. That's why it's a sex trafficking hub, because that's where the vulnerable people are. So of course, the sex traffickers just circle the block looking for victims. It's also where homeless camps are frequently set up, because they can easily go get their meal every day. And so catty corner to the property that I managed was a large homeless camp. And so all day I could just watch, what was happening. And so I knew who the drug dealers were. I knew the drug dealers that would pull up and get bags of drugs on their bicycles, on their stolen bicycles, and then take them out. I knew who the sex traffickers were because I would see them pull up and grab a girl and throw her a black dress and push her in the car. And I saw all this happening. And so I identified one, and I learned his first name because he pulled up one day and got out of the car and slapped this girl. And she was, a homeless girl, and I knew that she had a drug problem. And so she's cursing at him, and she calls him David. I'm like, noted, his name is David. The next day, we have what I call prayer warriors. They come out, and it was a bunch of women, and they walk up and down the homeless camp and around my property, and they literally just pray over what we're doing, the prayer warriors. So here come the prayer warriors over the homeless camp. They're praying. It's wonderful. Here comes David in his hoopty car, and I guess he's angry that we're there. So he pulled up on the sidewalk and basically tried to run people over. And he's up on the sidewalk and just kind of sitting there in his car. And I just calmly walked over and just leaned in towards his window, and I said, David. And he snaps around because he's like, how do you know my name? And I just started leaning into him, this is not what God had intended for your life. Pushing drugs to the homeless, just praying into him, leaning into him. He gets out of the car. David's a foot taller than me, and he's just sitting there and I just keep praying at him. And finally, Eric, he just kind of like, he just fell. He just kind of fell on his butt and his head's hanging and I keep praying. And he was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I bet you're not, pray. He finally gets in his car and I said, and pull your pants up. Cause he was one of these saggers,
Yeah.
He pulled his pants up, got in his car, takes off, and he never returned to the neighborhood again, ever. I don't know where he went next, but he did not return to the neighborhood again. So that's the kind of stuff that was happening at Second and Cordova in Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just think that one interaction you had there could have saved how many girls, women? Like, wow.
We can only pray so, because I have stories where they did not end so well, yeah.
Yeah. And, we're still talking about some of the challenges and what are some of the things that happened that maybe didn't end so well?
Yeah. The black dress story that I referenced, there was this beautiful young girl, and I'm guessing she was probably the youngest in the shelter. We only accepted adults. Children go through a different system, so you had 21 and over to come into the emergency shelter, and she was just barely, but she was drug addicted. But by the way, that's typically what a sex trafficker does. Is if you're not addicted to drugs, they quickly get them addicted to drugs because that's their method of control. So if I can get you on meth, now you're mine, because you're going to come to me for that next hit. And they may start out with something more comfortable like heroin, but then quickly get them on meth and fentanyl. And of course, the death rate is just through the roof up there on fentanyl. But this particular young lady, got in the truck with this trafficker, and we didn't hear from her for a couple of days. And sure enough, they found her body buried in a snowdrift a couple of blocks down from us. And the stories that came from the girls, I didn't obviously see her, but that she had strangle marks on her neck. And so just trying to understand what her last minutes, might have been like. Now, one that survived was another young lady, and I got a call to come pick her up and take her to the hospital. She had been returned to us by the Alaska Department of Safety, and they found her 3 hours from Anchorage in this little village. So she had been taken from us, and she said she didn't take any drugs. She wasn't a drug user, but she drank a beer with them. Well, obviously they put something in her beer, because she woke up 3 days later, 3 hours away from us, naked in somebody's house, and ran out naked. And the Department of Safety picked her up and brought her back to us. And then I had to take her to the hospital. And of course, she had been brutally abused in any way you can imagine, and had to survive that. So that's how they operate up there.
How does that affect, like, for example, when you saw the girl be, thrown the black dress and pulled into the car, and then the woman that got strangled, and then this other woman, like how does that affect you? What's that like? Like, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, the girl who got strangled, it was really sad, because her mother was also a guest of the emergency shelter and had worked through to sobriety. And they were both staying at the shelter in this plan to become sober. And even though the younger, the daughter was working on it, the mother was sober, but then had to face what happened to her daughter. So that was the hardest part, is watching the suffering that it caused. But Eric, I can say that at first I didn't handle it well because it was dark. I went up there in the winter, and then I had to face my own trauma as that was coming up. And so obviously I ended up in therapy. I ended up depressed, but worked through it. But then once I worked through that, it's just daily. Again, I'm going to have to reference my faith, because there's no way to talk about my story without it. Every day I had to lift that burden and just give it to Christ and let him carry it, because I'm like, this is too much. I can't. But then once I prayed through it and could do that every day, and that's what I even did at the sex offender registry, I would read through a case and I would start to get sick, reading what happened to these kids. And then I would go, but wait, God's not in time, so I can actually pray for that child right now. And I would just stop and pray. And that's how I got through it. You have to have a support system and an understanding of a higher power. And in my case, God, our creator, to get through it. So that's how I did it.
Yeah, with something like that, I don't know how else you would do it. Like that is just so
Yeah.
heavy. I mean, to experience those things, even though I would imagine they're really they're traumas. I mean, even though it didn't happen to you, but you were right there and these people, that's a trauma that you have to work through. So again, you're an incredible human being for voluntarily leaving the corporate world and putting your boots on the ground there in Anchorage.
I appreciate you saying that, but really, I mean, I did it for 14 months and now I'm up here trying to do it from a different angle, which is staying informed on things like artificial intelligence and what's happening online, and we can talk about that. But the
Oh
real
yeah.
heroes, and I want to bring attention to this, is think of the women working at that emergency shelter day in and day out. And I know several of the women who have been there since its inception and that they, have become mother to these girls. Those are the heroes. Those are the women who just stick it out and stay in there and day after day after day get attacked verbally, physically, abused, but they just stay in there and stay with these women. And then they get to watch as the women who survive, the women who go through the program and go through the plan and accept Christ and make a better life, get to see the fruit of their labors. And so I cannot stress enough that if you want to do something for human trafficking, look to your local community, find out where the shelters are, find out who the women are or the organizations that are fighting behind the scenes. And that's where you want to volunteer or spend your money.
Yeah. So you had mentioned artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And oh boy.
Yeah.
Like, where do we even start with that? I've got a lot of info about that. What do you know about artificial intelligence and porn and
Oh God. Well, so I mean, artificial intelligence is defining our reality, right? I mean, it's defining the movies we watch, the content we read. It's defining our new reality. And what's scary about that is obviously it can be used for powerful good or it can be used for our demise because there are individuals behind it setting the filters of how artificial intelligence works. So, for example, I've got two different artificial intelligence engines that I use a lot of times to help with my research. And in one, I can put what is pedophilia and it will give me a reasonable answer. And the other one, it will say pedophilia is minor attracted persons.
Oh my God.
And that they can't help it. So it's feeding into define this reality of making it okay. And it's just like you're saying about Netflix, trying to separate it and making us think that it's okay if we put different words around it. So that's the horrible, scary part. But then secondly, some sex trafficking groups and gangs are so sophisticated that they're using artificial intelligence just like, a corporation would, in that I can show you, there's an app called Whisper, and it's just, you post these little pictures and you can put a little phrase with it. And if you put something that indicates you're underage and vulnerable, like if I'll put I'm lonely or something like that, I'll get 10 responses from artificial intelligence chatbots that were smart enough to know, oh, this looks underage or vulnerable, and start saying, hey, do you need a sugar daddy? Or do you want to make $10,000 a week? Just like that. Boom, boom, boom. That's artificial intelligence. So the bad guys have figured out, already how to use AI and how to run their businesses with it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's only just begun. For example, if a family is posting pictures of their kids online, a pornographer now can take that picture of your kid,
yeah,
and they scan it in, and they can put that face on any other kid or person, and it looks just like them. You could not tell that it was not that person.
Within minutes. I mean, they can do that within minutes. The software is just so smart and so easy to use for them. They can do that within minutes. And then it's put into files that are sold, and then they communicate on Signal and on Telegraph and these different chat methods to share files. And then it's currency. So, everybody is always wondering, well, how do you even get child sexual abuse material? Well, on these platforms, you have to earn the trust by bringing them something. And so somebody will take a picture of their daughter or their stepdaughter or their son or something in their pajamas or something that seems almost harmless, but that's step one just to get in. And then once you share that, then you can go on to the next level and you can get more degrading and more abusive and younger kids. And then to get in deeper, you have to share more from your own world. And so then you're convincing or blackmailing somebody, well, now I need you to do this sex act on camera, or I'm going to, it's sextortion, or I'm going to tell everybody at your school and your parents and your teachers if you don't. And that's how they're trading this currency like baseball cards on these platforms.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of school, just yesterday I saw an article about a young girl that one of her fellow male students had used artificial intelligence to put her face on some naked or pornographic pictures, and they were spreading them around the school. And that's underage porn, right? Like, so
Absolutely.
these boys are, like, this is going to trial, so like this. And like I said, this has only just begun. Like, if artificial intelligence were a person, it would be barely an infant.
Right. It's going to grow up and get unruly in a heartbeat. I don't know the demographic of who listens to this, but I would tell anybody under 18, or if you have kids, they need to understand. Now that I've been able to talk more and more to kids in different schools and things like that, one of the big things now is they're sending pictures to each other constantly of, it's like, send me your boobs, send me your butt, send a dick pic, whatever. They need to understand that is child sexual abuse material, and you can be charged. So if somebody decided to charge another person, it doesn't matter that who you're sending it to is underage or that the person, it's like two 15-year-olds sharing that, they're both guilty. And I don't think they understand that, but that's CSAM, and they're spreading it, and it can be charged.
Yes, and it does. Well, Sabrina, for this portion, we need to call it quits for here for a minute. So I appreciate you being here. Sabrina will be back in the next episode. And in this portion, we talked a lot of the challenges with sex trafficking and porn, artificial intelligence, and such. But when she comes back, she's going to tell us some of the more the positive things and things that we can do to prevent sex trafficking, and why perhaps even to get off porn. So anyway, Sabrina, thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Eric. Sounds good.
Are you struggling with porn or sex addiction? Then apply for a free strategy call with Eric today at powerfuleric.com.